Welcome to the first episode of Advancing Ocular Health, a podcast mini-series in which ophthalmologists and optometrists discuss the latest innovations in eye care pharmaceuticals. Today, Dr. Rajan P. Malhotra from Ophthalmology Associates in St. Louis and Dr. Eric T. Brooker from the Advanced Vision Institute in Las Vegas discuss the safety and efficacy of ZERVIATE, the first new molecule for allergic conjunctivitis in over 10 years. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brooker from Las Vegas, and I'm here with Dr. Malhotra from St. Louis. Welcome, Dr. Malhotra.
Thank you, Dr. Brooker.
Well, we're really excited to be here today to talk about a brand new product from a company called Alleviate for allergic conjunctivitis known as ZERVIATE, which they were able to isolate the molecule from a product that's been used for several years in ZERVIATE and offer that an ophthalmic solution. Dr. Malhotra, have you had a chance to use this in your practice?
I have. I started using it soon after it was released, and I've been very familiar with other products from Eyevance, because they're very prominent in the anterior segment, including Tobradex ST and Flarex. But I was very happy when ZERVIATE came out, and I'm excited to talk about it.
That's good. We had the same experience in our practice as well. Eyevance, although they're a new company, all of their product offerings are very high quality. And we've had great patient outcomes with all of them, not just clinically on our end, but patients reporting improvements in their symptoms, and they come back happy. And that's the most important thing for us. Here in Las Vegas, we've had a really high resurgence recently of allergic conjunctivitis. So we've had a really nice opportunity to test out ZERVIATE. How's things out in St. Louis? Have you had a lot of cases similar?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of allergic conjunctivitis cases since it's big allergy season right now. We saw a lot during our telemedicine during the shutdown, and then especially after opening up about a month ago, we're continuing to see a big surge of ocular allergies.
Absolutely, and in fact, we understand that almost 40% of patients in North America actually suffer from some form of allergic conjunctivitis. And allergic conjunctivitis just happens to be the most common conjunctivitis that optometrists and ophthalmologists encounter in their practices. Interestingly enough, 30 to 70% of patients that have allergic rhinitis also suffer from allergic conjunctivitis. But we've been finding that a lot of those patients go undiagnosed and sometimes untreated. Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, I definitely noticed that. And sometimes patients come in and, they usually could self-diagnose their allergic rhinitis, but sometimes they don't realize that their ocular surface symptoms are related to allergies. They may think it's dry eye or other conditions. And so coming in for the diagnosis, we're educating them on it's really allergic rhinitis. So I agree, it is definitely underdiagnosed and even undertreated.
Yeah, and the interesting impact, and I saw a study on this in the Journal of Allergy and Immunology, is that many patients report that it really has an adverse effect on their quality of life, whether that's them not being able to be as efficient at work or enjoy the activities that they do most commonly. When you're using it with your patients, how often are you recommending the dosing of the medication for ZERVIATE?
So I'm recommending it twice a day, on label, using it morning and evening. And many times patients will ask me, do I need to use this year round or, and then I tell them they could use it as needed once their symptoms improve.
Oh, that's excellent.
I'll say, as you know, Dr. Brooker, there's been a lot of treatment options for allergies out there. And some of them, even though, they work, there's been some side effects that patients complain about, including dysgeusia or an altered taste from using them, and sometimes it exacerbates some of their ocular surface problems and makes their dry eye worse. So I was really excited with ZERVIATE coming out because it addresses these issues without having many of those side effects.
Absolutely, and I noticed the comfort level with ZERVIATE is much better compared to some of the more recent allergy eye drops that have come into the marketplace that do cause a lot of stinging. And I find that patients have a hard time committing themselves to using a drop if they don't find comfort on initial application as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned just earlier, that ZERVIATE's the first ocular formulation of cetirizine, which is common oral antihistamine, one of the most common oral antihistamines prescribed by allergists, and most patients are familiar with it as Zyrtec, and is one of the first new topical ophthalmic antihistamines released in the last 10 years. And I've definitely had, when I bring it up to patients and ask them if they're, as I diagnose them with ocular allergies, and I'm asking are you using anything for allergies right now? And they commonly say Zyrtec, but they say, gosh, with Zyrtec, I sometimes get sleepy from it, so I don't like taking it. And when I tell them, look, you could use it now as an eye drop, they're excited to be able to use an eye drop and not have the side effects of causing any drowsiness with it.
Yeah, that's exactly been my experience as well. You don't get, because it's an H1 receptor antagonist, we see that it quenches ocular itching, which is one of the on labels for the FDA approval. And because it's an H1 receptor agonist, it's selective. We found it also helps stabilize the mast cells because it's preventing histamine from bonding back onto mast cells and re-stimulating this allergic type reaction and degranulation of the mast cells. And similar to some other products that are out there, it has the same effect of mast cell stabilization as well as this selective H1 receptor antagonism.
Yeah, like you said, as a compound, cetirizine is known to be a very potent H1 receptor antagonist, and it's also known to be a mast cell stabilizer. But one really positive effect is that it doesn't have any effects on the muscarinic receptors, because a lot of antihistamines are really potent muscarinic antagonists, and cetirizine or Zyrtec or ZERVIATE isn't a muscarinic antagonist. And so because of this anti-muscarinic activity is not really a desirable because it causes a lot of drying effects, especially on the ocular surface. So the fact that it's a very potent H1 antagonist and it has no effect on the muscarinic receptors is a big advantage to cetirizine or ZERVIATE.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen that in practice. And I've had some patients that have come in on these other selective H1 antagonists and oral forms, and they're suffering from dryness, and they still have the conjunctivitis as well. And in some cases, I've actually taken them off the oral medications and just put them on the topical cetirizine. And sometimes we end up adding in another, like in a spray, a nasal spray, but those tend to be very, very effective. So I think the label that and the things that they're telling us from Vyvanse of how this medication works, I fully agree that it's a very effective treatment.
Our program will continue after a short break. This podcast is brought to you by Vyvanse Pharmaceuticals. At Vyvanse, we're advancing ocular health by investing in vision through ophthalmic therapies. Our mission is to ensure optimal vision and better quality of life for all patients. To learn more, visit Vyvanse.com. That's EYEVANCE.com.
So, Dr. Brooker, I'm sure you're familiar with the phase 3 trials for ZERVIATE. And as you know, any allergy medication that's approved in the United States, the gold standard for studying these and approving this in the U.S. is doing a conjunctival antigen challenge model. And we're involved in a lot of FDA trials in our practice. And when I first started in our practice 20 years ago, being the low man on the totem pole, I was there on Saturdays doing these conjunctival antigen challenges. And one thing I learned is that patients will do almost anything for money because they'd get paid to be in these studies. And after I saw what these patients sometimes had to go through, we would, if you're familiar with this, we'd actually do skin testing to see if they're allergic to what we're testing. And then once we found out what they're most allergic to, we would actually, with a pipette, put it in their eyes and challenge them. And then in these studies, they'd either be randomized to vehicle or the drug. And then once we found out what they're allergic to, prove that they reacted to it in their eyes, we'd actually basically, with a pipette, put it at a titration in their eye and 15 minutes later start evaluating whether how they're reacting, or even as soon as 3 minutes later, how the vehicle and the drug is working against this patient that's being challenged with what they're allergic to. And some of the worst allergies we saw was to cats and grasses, that were actually putting cat dander or grasses straight in their eyes. So when I saw patients go through this, I thought, oh my gosh, these patients are getting paid. I don't know if it's worth the $500 they're getting paid to be in these studies. And when ZERVIATE came out, we were actually involved in these studies. So we looked at, and they even segregated these trials to moderate patients and severe patients with allergies. And so what patients were done is once they proved they were allergic to what they're allergic to on the skin testing and even on conjunctival testing, then patients were randomized either to vehicle or to ZERVIATE. And 15 minutes after they were exposed to the drug or given the drug, then they were challenged. And they were challenged with the antigen. And then immediately in the ZERVIATE group, we started seeing results that were statistically significant where they had less itching compared to vehicle. So we saw an onset of action as soon as 3 minutes after the challenge.
Wow.
And then we also looked at patients to look at duration of action to see how long the drug was working. So we would give them the drug and then 8 hours later challenge them. And then again, 3 minutes after the challenge, we started seeing a significantly improvement in less itching in the patients that got ZERVIATE versus the vehicle. Wow. So I learned early on in my career, because we do, like, St. Louis is a hotbed for allergies, that how these studies, so when you see a drug that's approved for allergies, you see they have to go through this challenge model to prove that it actually works.
Well, Dr. Malhotra, the studies you presented are really profound, in that it looks like Iovance really did their due diligence here in these studies, and that the medication really helped patients with their allergies, and most notably the ocular itching in both the studies, and not only the moderate but the severe cases. The statistics that you mentioned are based on them having the drops and then 15 minutes later having the allergies induced into their eyes and seeing how much they responded to it. And one thing that I noted that you said is that they still had less itching even after they had taken the drop 8 hours ago, and then you put allergens into their eye. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. So that they had to do that to prove the duration of action. That's why it did get a BID indication, because it lasted 8 hours. So 8 hours after giving them the medication. And one thing, like I said, and these poor patients that got vehicle, it was obvious, because once you put this antigen in a patient that didn't get anything, they needed to be rescued. So and usually these patients did pretty miserable in the patients that got vehicle, but you could see a marked difference between the vehicle patients and the drug patients. And of course, as investigators, we're masked as to what the patient's getting. We know a lot of allergy patients have concomitant as a comorbid condition, dry eye. So having an antihistamine, mast cell stabilizing drug like cetirizine, in addition to having a lubricant like an artificial tear with two good artificial tear components mixed in one drop, is very synergistic. So I think that's why it really leads to a lot of the safety and a lot of the comfort of this drug. And looking at the FDA trial results, and if you look at any of the adverse events that's listed on label, the ocular hyperemia was similar between the drug group and the vehicle group, which was at 6.7%. The installation site pain was very low at 3.6% on the ZERVIATE group versus 0.9% in the vehicle group. And really there was no visual acuity loss, which was actually less in the cetirizine group or the ZERVIATE group versus 2.1% in the vehicle group. So one big differentiating factor is in all the patients in the FDA trial, of all the 511 patients that were on the treatment of cetirizine or ZERVIATE, only one patient reported a dry eye event, which is a really low percent. So it was a very well-tolerated drug. And no patients, I was going to point out, complained of any dysgeusia. So there was not any altered taste like we see with some of the other products that are out there.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I noticed that some of the patients that were enrolled in the study were, 2 years old, two-year-olds. So young patients. And I think that's excellent that we know that it's safe to use in children, because many children do have a lot of allergic conjunctivitis and allergic symptoms.
Right, and since it was a topical drop, it had very low systemic absorption, and so that way the patients they didn't get any dysgeusia, no altered taste, but they didn't get any of the drowsiness that patients sometimes report with taking oral Zyrtec.
That's excellent.
Our program will continue after a short break. This podcast is brought to you by Eyevance Pharmaceuticals. At Eyevance, we're advancing ocular health by investing in vision through ophthalmic therapies. Our mission is to ensure optimal vision and better quality of life for all patients. To learn more, visit eyevance.com. That's EYEVANCE.com.
So one big advantage of using ZERVIATE is it's very comfortable for our patients. And one unique feature of ZERVIATE, it has a component called hydrella, which is a combination of glycerin and hydroxypropyl methylcellulose, or HPMC, which are both two components found in many lubricant drops or artificial tears. And it's a very comfortable drop because it has a neutral pH of 7.0. And that makes it comfortable because a lot of children have allergies. It's safe in children in ages 2 and older. And so obviously children don't like drops that sting. So this is a comfortable drop. It lubricates because a lot of patients that have allergies can have concomitant dry eye. And this is a drop, since it has a built-in glycerin and HPMC. Have you had a lot of good experience with this also, Dr. Berker?
Absolutely. And I think when I first started using it, I was very delighted to see how many patients came back and told me that their eyes felt much more comfortable. They had less itching, and they just overall felt better. So the compliance was very high using this medication. And when I looked back, it made me curious. So I went back and looked at some of the studies, some of which you have mentioned, and I saw that in the studies that when patients use this, that they reported very good comfort scores on a scale of 1 to 10. All patients were almost close to 0. They were between 0 and 1 in their comfort score, which is telling us that, patients in the studies also found the drop very, very comfortable. And that's what we've seen in the real world in our clinic. What about with you?
I've had a great experience with using it with patients. I hadn't had patients complain of any altered taste like I've had with some of the other products that I've used. There's not any excessive sleepiness that patients have complained about with even using oral medications. And the other advantage that I like using with ZERVIATE is that it comes in individual single-use vials, which patients like because it's convenient to take if they're using it at work or if they're traveling. They have these vials. They're used to using individual preservative-free dry medications, but they like using these vials because they're used to using them with just like their artificial tears.
Right. And that's been great. And because there is a lot of experience with Zyrtec out in the market, which is the #1 allergist recommended brand over-the-counter selective oral antihistamine, and patients understand and they're anxious to try it. And the nice thing about that is that Eyevance has really been committed to stepping up and helping patients have access through their access program for patients. And we've been able to get patients copay cards, and using different pharmacies, the most patients are paying is $45. And so have you had good success with that out in San Diego?
I have. And I know in the past, a lot of allergy medicines aren't covered by insurance. They're pretty much forced to use over-the-counters that don't work as well. And so because of this copay card, it works with private insurances, and it also works even in Medicare patients. And the patients are assured to pay no more than $45 for this product, which is really reasonable for a product with all these advantages. And the other, with being the advantages being it has a really rapid onset of action as early as 3 minutes after being exposed to something the patient's allergic to, and having a long duration of action, at least up to 8 hours, based on the FDA trials. And on top of that, it has the advantage of not exacerbating any type of dry eye, because it has a low incidence of dry eye side effects based on only one patient out of 511 patients in the trial reporting any type of dry eye.
Yeah, I think that's why it's fit in so well in our dry eye practice here in Las Vegas, because we do have a lot of allergic patients as well that suffer from allergic conjunctivitis. And I'm really excited about this new formulation, the Hydrella, that you mentioned earlier. And I think that has been part of our success with the medication, because patients have felt so comfortable with it. And I guess that correlates with the studies that we've seen. And because that probably has to do with the vehicle that you mentioned, which HPMC and glycerin that's known as Hydrella. We didn't mention too much about the pH. What did you think about the pH of this medication?
Yeah, it's a very neutral pH, and so that's why I think that also leads to the comfort. So not only the Hydrella, like you mentioned, but the actual neutral pH makes it comfortable. And again, it's approved in children 2 and older, so that's also a big advantage, that you have a comfortable drop that's approved in kids. And again, it comes in these individual single-use vials, which is the only allergy product available in these single-use vials. So I think I'm excited about that also.
Yeah, we've seen that exactly in our practice. We actually dose patients when they're in the office, and we've seen that they've had a great response quickly, even within just a few minutes, and they leave our office happy. That's great. Well, thanks, Dr. Malhotra. I'm glad we had the time to get together and talk about ZERVIATE and Vyvanse and the opportunities for optometry and ophthalmology for treating allergic conjunctivitis.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Brooker. So hope to maybe see you soon in Las Vegas sometime.
That sounds good.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Advancing Ocular Health. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed the experience, leave us a review. Join us next episode when we'll discuss the latest innovations in ocular steroids by focusing on Tobradex ST.